The Matt Bernier Show.
If you're following along on live.drf.com, thank you for doing so. If you watch or listen podcast version, SoundCloud, YouTube, drf.com, iTunes, got all sorts of different ways for you to find the show. Good on you. Half hour this week. If you want to follow me on Twitter, fire any questions, comments, concerns, whatever you want, at Bernier_Matt. The normal way we work this show, we'll go over a couple races, we'll talk about whatever sort of new and interesting, we'll go over maybe a little bit of football at the end of the show, but obviously all eyes are pointing toward next Friday and Saturday. It's the Breeders' Cup 2016. It's finally upon us. 1 week from today, we will have the big races. Starting anyway, the Breeders' Cup on Friday. You'll have the distaff, you'll have the 2 juvenile turf races, one for the boys, one for the girls, as well as the dirt mile. Big things coming. We'll be out at Santa Anita next week. We got to figure out some things as far as scheduling and what it's actually going to look like, whether there's going to be video along with my show or it's just going to be audio. May end up being ultimately just audio, but we'll have 2 shows. One of them is the DRF Players Podcast. It's going to be on Wednesday. We're going to be doing that at 8 o'clock on the East Coast, 11 o'clock here on the West Coast, so that should be up at some point during the day. And then Thursday, it'll be the Matt Bernier Show with all of the boys from the DRF Players Podcast. Same time, like I said, probably leaning at this point more toward just audio than video, but still TBD. We've got some things to iron out. I kind of teased it earlier a couple weeks ago, and I'm going to have to unplug this because I can just hear myself nonstop in my ear. At this point, I talked about it a couple weeks ago that we're going to look at it and say, I wanted to get a better idea as far as the fields are concerned for the Classic and the Distaff, and I think the guys on the DRF Players Podcast have already kind of started with this, but I had said that I wanted to do it as well. And we're going to make a value line for the Breeders' Cup Classic and the Breeders' Cup Distaff. Now, those of you that have never made a value line before, the way that it works, you go through and you basically assign odds to each individual horse, whether you think they're a contender or not, and it has to total up to 100 points. The idea there becomes, at that point, whatever the odds are that you've assigned to whatever horse, that's what you would require minimum to make a wager. Anything below that is obviously an underlay. Anything above that is an overlay. Now, I want to sort of compare and contrast a value line to what a potential morning line is, and you're going to have to keep in mind that with some of these races, we could have defections over the next 5, 6, 7 days. So I'm just going based on everything that's listed as far as the odds are concerned for the Classic and the Distaff that we've got on drf.com. Let's start off with the Breeders' Cup Classic. We're going to take a look at the field and Mike Watchmaker, the DRF National Handicapper's morning line. This is his morning line, what he thinks the public will bet these horses to appropriately as far as the price is concerned. You see California Chrome, no surprise. He's the morning line favorite according to Mike Watchmaker at 8-5. Arrowgate is at 4-1, Frosted at 8, Found at 10-1, Highland Reel at 12. The reason, again, you've got to keep in mind I'm saying that there's a very real chance that we don't get one of those 2, so accordingly the lines would change. You're just going to have to work with me. This is what we're dealing with here today as far as the Distaff and the Classic is concerned. You continue on, Opportunity at 15, Melatonin at 15 as we turn the page to the rest of the Breeders' Cup Classic field. FNX, everyone else from here on out, I don't want to say they're no-hopers, but there's certainly prices in the spot. And again, according to Mike Watchmaker's morning line odds, he has these horses at 20 and north, including More Story at 50-1. Again, the morning line, for those of you that are unfamiliar with what a morning line is, it's what the morning line maker projects the public will make these horses when they go off. It's not what their opinion of each individual horse is. That's what a value line is for. And we're going to take a look at my value line for the Breeders' Cup Classic with all of those horses that you just took a look at. Okay, and we're going to start right at the top with California Chrome. Mike Watchmaker had him a little bit shorter. I have him at 2-1. I have Arrowgate a little bit shorter than what Mike had him at 3-1. This is an interesting sort of, I don't want to call it a dilemma, but the idea is if you're already trying to project going forward what some of these horses are going to go off at, according to your odds, you are going to start getting an idea of how you're going to be looking at these races individually as well as in multi-race wagers, whether you're playing pick 3s, doubles, pick 4s, pick 6, whatever it may be. You see I have Frosted at 19-1. Both of the turf horses for Aidan O'Brien at almost 50-1. Opportunity at 19, Melatonin at 13 as we change over to page number 2. You're going to see some other big numbers in there at this point. Well, no, we're not going to go to the Distaff yet, fellas. We've got to go to the second page of the Classic, if we could. Where we are. FNX at 19-1, Keen Ice 32-1, Nyquist 24-1, Shaman Ghost, and so on and so forth. Now, the way that you go about making this, and for some of you that have never done it before, how do you come up with these odds? The idea is you're going to go through, you assign a percentage out of 100 It's essentially how many times you think if they ran this race 100 times, how many times does this individual horse win the race? I have California Chrome at 33%. 33% checks out to 2-1 odds. Arrogate, I have at 24%. That checks out to 3-1 odds. Now, again, the interesting thing about a value line and the way that this entire thing works is it's only as good as is your accuracy. So anyone can say, and I'm not picking on Mike Hogan from the DRF Players Podcast. I'm sure this will come up next week, and I believe they're recording a show at some point today, or if they already have, maybe they have. I'm sure it will come up. He tweeted about it, and he came over to our desks yesterday and brought up the idea that he pegged Songbird, and we won't take a look at that yet. We'll wait till we get back from commercial break to take a look at the distaff. He brought up that he thought that Songbird was an 8% chance to win the distaff, which translates to about 12-1 odds. Now, that to me is a little bit harsh, and we'll see that in time, but the bigger thing for me is, and I would stress to anyone that does this as an exercise that makes a value line, you really want to go and track and see how things shake down, because your value line is only as good as it is as far as accuracy is concerned. If it's not accurate, if your 2-1 shots don't win 33-ish% of the time, then, we've got an issue. If they win more than that, if they win 40 or 45%, you're not being strong enough with your opinion, and accordingly, you're never going to be able to wager on some of those propositions. The flip side, if you make a horse 3-1, like I have Arrogate at 24% or 25%, and they only win at, let's say, 20 or 18%, well, now all of a sudden you're being a little bit too bullish and you need to sort of retract that. I have a whole spreadsheet set up, and that's why when I go through and make these lines, sure, not all of your horses maybe are going to be completely accurate. Now, even if Songbird doesn't win, and I'm just using Mike as the example, I'm not suggesting that he's wrong. Again, the idea is value line, it's in the eye of the beholder. You're the one that, you're the only one that it really matters for. I'm just trying to do this to show you guys how it goes down and what I do and how I think it's made me a little bit sharper as far as actually determining true value on certain horses. You've got to go through and get a fairly significant sample size, but I go through and look and say, okay, well, all of a sudden, I'm making it up, if my 24-1 shots, which 4 out of 100 should win, if they're winning 10 of those races, then guess what? I'm really not being either honest or I'm not being very sharp. Again, you need to track all this in sort of a separate spreadsheet. If you're very serious about a value line, I know a lot of people don't like the idea of it, and that's fine. That's entirely up to you. Everyone has their own way of doing things. I find it's a very good way to sort of hone in on how accurate your opinion, or I don't want to say your opinion, how accurate the percentage is that you assign this horse today on any given day, any given situation. Are you being a little overconfident? Are you not being confident enough? Then if you're just totally out to lunch, then maybe you need to reassess things as far as actual value and odds are concerned. So let's take a look at my odds one more time for the Classic, fellas, if we could. We're going to throw that up. Again, you can contrast these numbers to what Mike Watchmaker has as far as the morning line that he has set for this race. You also, I can't stress enough, have to keep in mind that not all of these horses are going to run in this race. It seems highly unlikely that both Aidan O'Brien runners will run in this spot. Maybe a couple other defections as well, whether it's a gun runner or a war story. Maybe they go to the dirt mile. I think California Chrome fair odds would be 2-1. I think Arrogate fair odds would be 3-1. From then on, everyone else is a big number. I think my third choice that I have listed is Melatonin at 13-1. Everyone else from then on is essentially a 20-1 shot and up, which in a nutshell is saying, I'm looking at this race saying I think it's a 2-horse race. If I'm being just frank. I think it's California Chrome and I think it's Arrogate. If anyone else were to win, one, I would need to make sure that I'm going to get paid. I wouldn't want to take anything like Frosted, who will probably go off at 8-1, and I think he's about a 20-1 chance going 1.25 miles on dirt going 2 turns against these horses. And two, as far as multis are concerned, you can be pretty sure that I'm going to be honed in on 2 horses in particular. And maybe I weight them. I don't know who I'm picking yet in the paper. I don't know who I'm going to be giving out as far as any sort of picks are concerned. But you can be pretty sure that based on these odds, the way that I've laid it out, if this field goes, and you'll have to make adjustments with scratches or changes as far as workouts are concerned, whatever it may be, for me, the Classic is essentially a 2-horse race between California Chrome and Arrogate. Again, not breaking any news there, but the idea is now you kind of see the dynamics of how this whole thing works. And guess what? We're going to go to break. When we come back, we're going to do it all over again, and I'll walk you through it step by step with the Breeders' Cup Distaff. A much more interesting race from an odds standpoint, because you can make a case for about 5 or 6 different ones that they should be shorter or higher depending on how you feel about them. The Matt Bernier Show, when we come back, Breeders' Cup Distaff value line. Stay with us.
The Keeneland November Breeding Stock Sale. The pinnacle of bloodstock opportunity. Featuring siblings of Grade 1 winners like Caravaggio, Sweet Loretta, Honor Code, Songbird, Uncle Mo, and more. And beautifully bred weanlings out of Grade 1 winners like My Conquistadori, Daisy Divine, and Midnight Lucky. The Keeneland November Breeding Stock Sale, November 8th through the 20th. Learn more at november.keeneland.com.
California Chrome, straight and strong. Absolutely sensational. California Chrome. California Chrome. To California Chrome. All the way to the Kentucky Derby. California Chrome wins impressively.
He's gone into overdrive. California Chrome wins the Dubai World Cup.
One of the greatest performances you'll ever see.
Chrome turns to gold.
When it comes to betting the Breeders' Cup, DRF Bets is lengths ahead of the competition. Starting now, you'll get a $50 free bet just for joining with no deposit or wager required, plus a $125 bonus and $75 in additional free bets. That's $250 in cash bonuses. By far the easiest $250 you'll ever earn. Visit drf.com/BCFreeBet and use code BREEDCUP to break out of the gate with $250 in cash.
12:11 on the East, 9:11 on the West. The Matt Bernier Show here on DRF Live. If you're watching on live.drf.com, good on you. If you listen podcast version, SoundCloud, YouTube, iTunes, drf.com, all sorts of different ways for you to find the show. We're really getting into nitty-gritty. We've got a week until the Breeders' Cup starts. Breeders' Cup Friday, and the highlight of Breeders' Cup Friday, among other races, don't get me wrong, the other three Breeders' Cup races are good, but the highlight of Friday and potentially the entire weekend is the Breeders' Cup Distaff. What we did at the top of the show, we went over the Breeders' Cup Classic, showed you the morning line odds according to Mike Watchmaker with the entire field, knowing that there will be some changes. We're about to show you right now Brad Free's odds for the morning line for the Breeders' Cup Distaff. Let's take a look at that slide if we could. This field looks pretty sound. Now maybe there's going to be an issue, maybe there's a defection with a scratch or something along those lines, but you don't really have anyone with the exception of Karina Mia who looks like they'll go anywhere else. I understand Carolina is still iffy, maybe she goes in the Filly Mare Sprint. I think this race is going to stay pretty intact though. So this is the morning line for Brad Free. Anyone just listening to a podcast version, Songbird 2-1, Beholder 5-2, Stellar Win 3-1, Carolina 6-1, I'm a Chatterbox and Forever Embroidered both at 10-1, Karina Mia if she goes 15-1, Landover Sea, Corona del Inca at 30-1. That's the morning line odds. Those are the morning line odds according to Brad Free. He's the one that did this race for the Distaff. Things could change obviously as we get closer. They'll draw these races sort of conclusively on Monday, and we'll have an idea what the actual morning line is. Again, the value line is not a reflection of what you think the public will bet. That's what the morning line is. The value line is what you yourself, as the handicapper, think is appropriate prices and appropriate odds, appropriate percentages for these horses in the likelihood or the unlikely scenario where they win a race. Let's take a look at my value line for the Distaff, and you're going to see some things are significantly different. I have Songbird at 3-1. I have Beholder and Stellar Win both at 4-1. If Carolina goes, I have her at 10-1. I'm a Chatterbox and Forever Embroidered are both 9-1 shots. Karina Mia, should she go, 32-1. Landover Sea, Corona del Inca, both 99-1. And again, what that essentially is saying to you, in the way that I look at it, is I think if they run this race 100 times, and I'm only using whole percentages. A lot of people will break it down into the tenths of a percentage when making a line. You can do that. The tighter you are, the more accurate you're going to be, which is a good thing. And there's a book that I could sort of, if anyone is into the idea of prediction and trying to track how accurate you are, there's a book called Super Forecasters I would strongly recommend to anyone that's serious about trying to find out how accurate you are and sort of projecting the likelihood or the unlikelihood of a certain event happening. So Corona del Inca and Landover Sea, I'm looking at it saying if they run this race 100 times, those two, the least I could give them, I have to give them a percentage. They're going to run. There's a scenario in which something happens. I gave both of them 1%. So the two of them combined, 2% chance. I'm essentially saying they're complete throwouts to me. Karina Mia, if she goes here, she's essentially a throwout to me at 32-1. I gave her about a 3% chance of winning. The interesting thing happens now when you look at those sort of six horses. You could possibly take out Carolina depending on if she goes in this spot or not. Carolina is the shortest, or the longest, I should say. She has the shortest percentage, in my opinion. She's the longest price at 10-1. I gave her a 9% chance. Chatterbox and Forever Unbridled, I gave each 10%, which translates to 9-1. Now, when you go through, and if you do track these sort of things in an entire spreadsheet form, and you go through and you find out, okay, do my 10-1 shots win, 9% of the time, you can use that to your advantage going forward. So when you make a value line for a race and you've got a lot of horses that are going off at 8, 9, 10-1, well, do they actually win at that percentage, or do they win lesser? Do they win more than that? If they win more, guess what? You're probably not being you're not being bullish enough. You've got to look at a couple different things, and this is the best way to make money long term in this game. Let's get to the big three though, where you've got Songbird, Beholder, Stellar Wind. I'm going to keep using Mike Hogan as the example simply because we talked about it yesterday. Mike gave Songbird about an 8% chance to win the distaff, and I believe he tweeted it out on Twitter. And that's fine. That's his opinion. I think it's significantly lighter than it should be, and I think most people would agree with that. I gave her a 26% chance, which translates to about 3-1. Again, if you want to get into the real tiny details and go to a tenth of a percentage point, that's your prerogative, and you're going to be more accurate in the long run. But I just feel like whole numbers for me, that's the easiest way to go. Putting her at a 3-1 shot, some people would look at it and say, well, why would you even do that? You know you're not going to get 3-1. That's not the point of the value line. The value line is to try to accurately assess the chances of each one of these horses. Now, I look at the race a little bit and think Songbird is likely to be on the lead. I don't think she's going to be by herself. You're going to have I'm a Chatterbox not too far behind, and you'll also have Beholder probably just right off of her. And then you'll have maybe a length or two back to Stellar Wind. Maybe she gets back to the sort of customary tactics that she enjoys to employ in these races. I think Beholder and Stellar Wind, I'm giving them both 20% chances. Now, maybe we'll find out. And that's the other thing, too, that you've got to keep in mind about a value line. You're only really going to be able to tell based on the actual sort of wins in these sort of studies. Horses that win are ultimately going to contribute to the overall percentage and however you're taking care of it and seeing how accurate you are with that. This isn't including hitting the board, win, place, or show. I'm in the midst of making some tweaks to my own database to figure out how accurate certain things are, or what the percentage of my 2-1 shots are that hit the board all entirely, to try to maybe hone in and make some better judgments and better decisions as far as exotics are concerned, exactas, trifectas, superfectas. But the big thing for me is, if you're being honest with yourself, and you do it before the race, I would strongly urge, even if you don't want to do it long term, try it with the Breeders' Cup this weekend. Now, the Breeders' Cup is arguably the best and worst time to do this sort of a thing because the fields are so competitive, you're very rarely going to have a heavy favorite. On the flip side, it's good to sort of have a race where there's a horse that you think is just a very likely win candidate, and you can assign 45% or 50%, and you're basically making that horse even money or 6-5. I would just strongly urge anyone watching or listening, try it. It may not be your cup of tea, it may not be something that you see out long term, but I would strongly urge anyone to try it and see how things work out and try to adhere to it. Now, you got to have a little bit of leniency. You got to be able to sort of massage the numbers a little bit, but I would strongly urge you to try it for the Breeders' Cup for the 13 or 14 races, see how those things work out. And if it's something that you feel is a positive or something that may potentially help you long term, I would go on with it. Again, anyone that's very interested in the idea of prediction and trying to track how accurate you are, I would strongly recommend the book Super Forecasters. I believe in Phil Tetlock, I believe, is the author or co-author. And that's really what got me into the idea of not just making the value line, but tracking it and find out, am I being a little bit overzealous, or am I not giving this horse enough of a chance, and I need to accordingly make some adjustments. So let's, one more time before we cut for break, let's take a look at the value line that I've created for the Breeders' Cup Distaff. If this is the field that decides to go, keeping in mind that Carolina could go in the Filly and Mare Sprint and Karina Mia could as well. Songbird I have as the favorite, and I think, again, 3-1 is what I think would be a fair number on her in this field. I don't think there's any way you get 3-1. I'm well aware of that. That doesn't mean I don't use her in multis. It just means from a win standpoint, she's probably going to be a bit of an underlay for me, and I don't want to deal with her. Beholder and Stellar Wind both at 4, Carolina at 10, I'm a Chatterbox and Forever Unbridled at 9-1, Karina Mia at 32, Landover Sea and Corona del Inca, each 99-1 shots. So that's a little bit of an overview on how going about making a value line could possibly be a good thing and a bad thing, depending on how you want to look at it, and maybe it's something that you want to try in the future. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to do a very, very quick review of last week's handicapping. We'll dive into 2 races coming up tomorrow on DRF Live. We'll get into some Week 8 NFL Trifecta. We've got to try to get back on the beam after a disappointing weekend last weekend. We'll get you into the Formulator race of the day for Friday the 10th at Laurel Park. Here on the Matt Bernier Show. Stay with us.
And shall win the winner of the Done Handicap.
This horse is the complete package. He's won from 7 furlongs to 1.1 miles. He's won on dual surfaces. He's won with and without Lasix, and he's traveled around the world and brought his A game with him.
He showed that he was a very top-class dirt horse.
Balance is key, and he was just perfectly proportioned. I think that's what made him so athletic and so efficient on the track. Well, the amazing thing about Outwork was just how similar he is to Uncle Mo. I mean, right away, of all of Rapoli's babies, he stood out as the most advanced, the most precocious, and the most talented, and that was exactly the same thing we'd seen a few years before with Uncle Mo.
Outwork wins it for John Velasquez.
To be able to win a Grade 1 like the Wood Memorial in only his 4th lifetime start was very impressive.
It is Outwork in front. Texas Red second best, and here is one talented colt named Spitester.
I would say Spitester is maybe one of the most exciting horses that I've trained. He was a grandson of Gone West. Another horse that I had trained named Elusive Quality from that line was a world record holder at Belmont Park. Spitester showed some of that same speed. When you'd ask him the question, he could answer.
One talented colt named Spitester.
$12:22 on the East, $9:22 on the West. The Matt Bernier Show here on DRF Live. Let's dive into it, all things handicapping. A quick review. We're not even going to give you the sort of slates. We just got to get through it because we're down to about 8 minutes left in the program. Raven Run was one of the 2 races we went over last week, and I thought a vulnerable favorite was Lightstream. Guess what? She went off favorite. She went out and won. She was just better than those horses. Hung on her left lead the whole way. I fear that when the waters get deeper, she's going to end up sinking a little bit. Thought a live long shot was Tacrease. Figured she was up against it in the Prioress up at Saratoga with the way that track was playing, and guess what? She just didn't pick her feet up. Kieran McLaughlin's numbers in grade stakes in Kentucky continue to be poor. I don't know why, because obviously the man knows what he's doing. It's just one of those things where certain geographic areas in the states for certain trainers, they just don't seem to work out very well. The Raven Run for me was a bit of a complete whiff. The California Flag, on the other hand, worked out very, very well, and this kind of ties in nicely with the value line talk that we had with the Classic and Distaff earlier. I didn't give you a live long shot or a most likely winner or a vulnerable favorite or anything like that. It was a short enough field. I just gave you a horse that I thought I liked. My pick was Acceptance. I thought he should have been a 9-2 chance. He went off at 5-1 and he got the job done. So that's where the value line comes in play. If he went off below 9-2, it would have been one where I just sit back and watch. He goes above, gives you an overlay, get involved. Acceptance gets the job done for us in the California Flag. Let's dive into 2 races this week, and both of these will be on tomorrow starting at, I believe, 3 Eastern on DRF Live. Don't hold me to that. We'll find out later on when the slate goes up. Let's take a look at the field for the Fayette. That's going to be down at Keeneland, the main event tomorrow afternoon. Closing weekend, I believe, down at Keeneland. Let's take a look at the field. I think it's an interesting race. You can go a couple different ways, and again, my odds are on the far right side if you're watching on DRF Live or if you're watching on YouTube, any other areas. My odds, not what the morning line is. Noble Bird is the heavy morning line favorite. I believe he's 6-5. I think it's a 9-2 shot, and I think he's a vulnerable favorite simply because at this point in his career, I think he absolutely needs to have the lead, and I'm not convinced with the presence of Mr. Z in this race. He gets the lead. It's a very, very interesting race. I think a live long shot in the horse that I picked in the preview. You can get the nuts and bolts handicapping in video.drf.com. I picked Chalkapology. Now look, he's never going to be the 30-1 that he's listed at on the morning line, but maybe he goes off somewhere in the area of 8 or 10-1. I made him 5-1. I thought his most recent start was very good. He's certainly going to need a career effort, let's say, if he's going to win in this spot. But there's no reason to think that he's not coming up to it in good form. Razor sharp. His two most recent starts on fast dirt have both been victories, and they've both been very impressive wins. I think this is an interesting horse. Chalk Apology. I made him 5-1, a live long shot. I think a vulnerable favorite is Noble Bird. Let's move to the Autumn Mist. It's going to be at Santa Anita tomorrow afternoon. I believe it's the last race. We're going to go over on DRF Live. Let's take a look at this field. Very, very interesting field. I think it's a well-matched field. I have two horses pegged at 7-2 co-favorite. That's the one Danilovna and the outside runner Belvoir Bay. Belvoir Bay concerns me slightly simply because I think there's a scenario in which the Peter Miller horse is just completely pounded at the windows. And it's the rare instance where Miller's got a less than stellar record, let's say, as far as a formulator fact is concerned with these horses stretching out after last out winners. I think she's very, very likely, but I think the most likely winner in the race is Danilovna for Graham Motion, shipping this one to the West Coast. Motion has done tremendous work over the past handful of years going to Santa Anita in these graded stakes races. Visually, you're not going to see a more impressive effort. Her stateside debut was tremendous at Belmont Park most recently. She just cruised up. Johnny V never got into her. She gets Flavian Pratt aboard here. I like Danilovna. I made her 7-2. I don't know that I get that, but I think she is the most likely winner of the Autumn Mist. 12:26. Let's dive into some Week 8 NFL picks. Last week was a disappointing week. 1-2 moves the year to date to 9-12. Okay, we're trying to get to that 52%. We got to beat the juice, and obviously you got to pick enough winners. So I don't need to go 3 for 3 this week. I'm not trying to get to 500, as I've said for the past 3 weeks. Just give me series wins. Give me 2 out of 3. 2 out of 3. Let's start. This is a very difficult slate, by the way. Very difficult slate. There's only one game that I actually truly liked, but apparently it sounds like almost everyone and their brother likes it as well. So this number is going to be lighter than what you're going to find out. Let's start with the first one, though. Arizona Cardinals +3 at the Panthers. Panthers coming off the bye week. Look, they need to recover and they need to regroup in a big way. The Cardinals are coming off that dumpster fire of a game on Sunday night, ended in a 6-6 tie. Catanzaro rips it. I mean, he could not have hit the upright more squarely. You think it's over, they're not going to get the job done. Hauschka and the Seahawks, well, Hauschka wasn't part of the drive down, but the Seahawks drive down. Hauschka just completely shanks the game-winning field goal with 2 seconds, 3 seconds left in overtime, whatever it was. This is just basically more, I understand they only scored 6 points. I think Arizona's getting it back together. Maybe Carolina just needed to hit the reset button over the course of the bye week, but you get Jonathan Stewart. His most recent start was very good when he came back from the injury for the Panthers. Look, I still love Cam, and I think he's got a lot. I think he can clearly bring a lot to the table, but if you're going to give me 3 points with the Cardinals, I think the Cardinals are, at this point, I just think they're a better team than the Panthers. I'll take that. Give me the points on the road. I know they're going out to the East Coast, but Arizona +3 for me. Philadelphia at Dallas. Dallas is laying 4 points. I think Dallas gets the job done. I think they win by a touchdown. Dak, Zeke, you're going to get Des Bryant back. That's the Sunday night game. The Eagles, look, they were my only win last week. I didn't know if I didn't go as far as to say I think I would pick them outright, but I took the points at home, and they handed the Minnesota Vikings their first defeat. We'll talk about the Vikings in a minute. I just think the Cowboys at this point, it's hard to argue with results. They just continue to go and go and go. The notion that Tony Romo could possibly take this team back over when he's healthy, to me, is asinine with the way that Dak's got this thing moving. I'm not suggesting he's a superstar, but boy, the kid looks every bit like he did when he was good at Mississippi State, not post, little issue with the DUI and post just being a dummy and losing his game. This is the kid that looked like for a hot minute he could have been a Heisman contender at one point. So give me the Cowboys at home, -4 Jerry World Sunday night. I think they get the best of the Eagles. In the last game, we talked about the Eagles beating the Vikings. I like the Vikings -4.5 at the Bears. Now, again, this may be the number that's a little bit light depending on if you have someone you go to or if you're in Vegas or if you use some website that we don't know about and we shouldn't talk about because we're not going to go into that. Last I'd heard, this number was going north of 6. I looked at it last night. It was 4.5 on a certain site that I look at. So the Bears are awful. Just plain and simple. The Bears are terrible. The Vikings, I know they didn't look good last week, but I still have a heck of a lot more faith in them than I do the Bears. And people that want to say Jay Cutler coming back is a positive, I don't care that, Hoyer broke his arm last week and you're down to the third stringer and now all of a sudden Cutler's a bum. He doesn't want to do it. He doesn't want to win. He doesn't care. He just all the memes that you've seen on the internet with Cutler, I think that's very accurate. I think Minnesota wins by at least 7. And with the number being 4.5, I'll take that. I'll lay the points there. The 3 games, let's try to get back on the winning side. Need to go at least 2-1 this week. Arizona +3 at the Panthers. The Cowboys -4 home against the Eagles. The Vikings -4 on the road at the Bears. DRF Live coming up tomorrow afternoon. Let's take a look at the slate of races that we will be bringing you through. Myself, Dan Illman, Mike Beer. Starting things, 3 o'clock, you're going to get a little bit of Keeneland, you get a little bit of Belmont, you'll get a stakes race from up north of the border at Woodbine. We'll wrap things up at Santa Anita with the Grade 3 Autumn Mist that we just discussed here on the show. Good day of racing, the calm before the storm. Because let's just be honest, not a knock against tomorrow's racing and not a knock against anything else. Everyone's getting excited for next week. Next week is when things really get going. You're going to have a full week of coverage here on DRF Live. If you don't have a DRF Plus subscription, you're going to want to get one. If you're watching on live.drf.com, right below this video player, you've got that news scroll. You're going to get all the latest news and nuggets from the reporters, the handicappers, the eyes, the ears, whatever you want to call them. They're on the ground. They're taking a look. They're seeing all these different workouts. They're seeing the best and the worst of these horses leading up to Breeders' Cup Friday and Breeders' Cup Saturday next week. Should be fun. I'm heading out Tuesday night with Peter Thomas Fornatale. We're going to be on the same flight. Wednesday morning, we'll have the DRF Players Podcast. I'll be a guest on that. Thursday morning, the Matt Bernier Show with the 3 boys from the DRF Players Podcast on my show. And then all sorts of other things are going to be going on next week. Out at Santa Anita Park for the Breeders' Cup here 2016. This has been the Matt Bernier Show. If you want to follow me on Twitter, at Bernier_Matt. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, criticisms, fire away at Bernier_Matt. If you've watched on live.drf.com, thank you for doing so. YouTube, SoundCloud, drf.com, iTunes, all sorts of ways for you to find the show. Next time you see this show, it will be Thursday of next week, but I can't stress enough, listen to both shows, the DRF Players Podcast on Wednesday, the Matt Bernier Show on Thursday. We'll get you ready for Breeders' Cup 2016 Friday and Saturday next week in Southern California. Without further ado, the DRF Formulator race of the day for Friday. It's the 10th from Laurel Park. Best of luck this weekend. I'll talk to you guys as a guest on Wednesday and as a host again on Thursday next week. Breeders' Cup is upon us.